Right. Jenny, can you hear us?
I can hear you perfectly well, David. Apologies for not being present, but a calamity on Sunday has forced me to not be able to drive for a while.
Oh dear, well I hope may all your calamities be little ones. I'm sorry to hear that.
No, falling backwards down a flight of stairs, so not great, but I'm very lucky that I haven't broken my back, just my foot.
Oh good, okay, well we all wish you a speedy recovery of what damage you have done. Anyway, good morning to you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the meeting of the EAP Planning Communities held today in Corby on the 13th of November. And everybody's extremely welcome. We've got a bit of a rare one today. We actually have a paper in which is advising the executive to take a particular course of action or not. So this is interesting. It's what the EAPs are actually set up to do. So I'm pleased to hear that. But before we get into that, are there any apologies for non-attendance, please?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillors Robin Carter and Ken Harrington.
Thank you very much. Are there any members' declarations of interest? There are none. You will have seen the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of September. And may I sign these as an accurate record? Thank you. Just one moment. Thank you, and I've done so. Excellent. Well, as I was alluding to a moment ago, this is an interesting paper. We have a duty to, or developers have a duty to provide a 10% biodiversity net gain, as I think everybody knows, in new development. And of course, how that is to be achieved is an interesting and sometimes vexed question. We are in this paper, and I'm looking forward to the discussion, I'm looking forward to Heather's introduction to it, but in this paper, one of the options is that the Council may enter into Section 106 agreements which secure biodiversity units sold from privately held biodiversity gain sites. Now, this is a new and exciting technique that some people are bringing forward, in that they operate and manage particular sites of biodiversity, and they sort of sell shares or credits into various developers so that they can comply with their biodiversity targets. So it will be an interesting addition to the suite of options which a new developer may wish to enter into. So this is not the only solution, but it is an interesting additional piece of armoury. So without further ado from me, I'm quite looking forward to this discussion. And so, Heather, the floor is yours.
Shall I, through you, Chair?
With pleasure.
Shall I firstly introduce you to colleagues around the table, and then we'll kick off the presentation. I'll be open and upfront at this stage. The breakdown in communication between myself and Heather as to who was taking the presentation. So we've both left it to each other, but we'll fill those gaps because we both made contributions towards the report, and I'll take it that you've read it. So what we'll seek to bring out or draw out is references and elements within the report itself to help develop the discussion and cover off some key points that we think it's helpful in particular to talk about. So if I move around from this end to this end, so I'm not sure how familiar you are with Andra Stopforth. I'm thinking so familiar. Her substantive role with the authority is as Principal Planning Officer within a planning policy function area. She's actually, though, been seconded for the last 18 months or so into a role that oversees the local nature recovery strategy and biodiversity net gain within and for the authority. She's actually here. She'll take a lead on the local nature recovery strategy to follow, report and to follow presentation. But I'm sure she'll contribute to discussions on biodiversity net gain side of things too. Then moving on to Heather. Heather Webb is a principal project officer. She's actually, though, a planning ecologist, so she carries with her that and has for many years within the county been a valuable contributor to all things biodiversity net gain and nature orientated. She's been making a significant contribution to this report to provide us with some guidance and input into that. Then if I move over to the other side of the table, you may be familiar with Jen, I'm sure you will be. Jen Bell, you are a project officer within planning policy, but actually a role seems to cover growth and regeneration as a whole. Very useful contribution that she makes to the work that is undertaken. So if I go then on to the biodiversity net gain report and provide some initial input, and I'm sure Heather will pick up on some further detail as we move through. The first thing to highlight perhaps is that we are at this stage exploring the role that the authority takes in bringing forward habitat banks within North Northamptonshire. There isn't as much as you would expect or hope out there to guide us. I know that we've done some work to explore what's going on elsewhere. In fact, only this morning having a conversation about what's going on abroad to accommodate habitat banks. So there's a lot of learning to be had, and so there's an air of, I suppose, of caution and gentle steps to ensure that the advice we're offering yourselves and ourselves are robust and aren't over risky in terms of their recommendations. But there is also a thought that the role that we do have to play can be quite valuable, can bring us to the table, and can mean that we can take a bit of a leadership role in terms of ensuring that biodiversity net gain is delivered that supports the environment itself within North Northamptonshire, but also people within that environment in North Northamptonshire. The mechanism that's being talked about is through entering into Section 106 agreements. So we're having conversations with our legal colleagues to ensure that information we provide and the routes that we're proposing to take are sufficiently robust and don't overcommit the authority. We're also having discussions around the commercial side to it. With any such proposal, that there is the potential of risk that we commit ourselves to something, we sign into a legal agreement, and then the onus on the authority can be greater than we initially anticipated. So we're seeking to ensure that we're doing, we're making progress in a considered manner. we're asking for you to consider the proposals, therefore, for how we address habitat banks. Also to consider, or whether agrees the right terminology, but consider the method for calculating fee related to that, and for monitoring over the significant period of 30 years, which is quite some commitment. I've already referenced, again, the commercial pressures related to such a proposal. Some of those relate to the potential for enforcement on those occasions when perhaps through monitoring the results indicate that the agreement isn't being substantiated by the proposal signed up to in terms of the habitat bank and the delivery. Then moving on through the report and a bit more about that themselves, and then I'll start running out of my detailed knowledge, and we'll hand over to Heather, but I will chip in, of course. There's three options there on the developer. So one is provision on site, and that's something that I think in most instances we'll seek to secure. So on site biodiversity net gain. Alternatives might be off-site biodiversity net gain. That can be on an alternative site that's in the control of the developer, or it can be through another site within the area, and that in effect is the habitat bank element to that. The final one is a contribution to central government for credits for delivery on sites within England. So with that, there's no guarantee necessarily that the investment that's been received from the developer is received for land within North Northamptonshire. So in effect, it could be anywhere within England. The purpose, just my final detail around habitat banks, the purpose is, put simply, I think, my expectation is that farming land, suitable farming land or other land, can be significantly enhanced for the benefit of nature, identifies itself through applications, I think, to be a habitat bank, and then we go about supporting that process over a 30-year period through the credits that have been identified or brought forward by the developer. Heather, are you able to provide some further advice?
Use your microphone.
Oh. I would say that it's not necessarily farmland, but it can be. And so for some farmers, it could be a revenue generator and a farm diversification opportunity on land that isn't perhaps as good for crop growing. So the habitat banks can be for habitat creation, but they can also be for restoration. So where you've got some sort of relict habitat, they could propose to restore it. So that's equally sort of viable. I would say, yes, that what Simon said is correct. There is a biodiversity hierarchy, the BNG hierarchy, which is additional to the mitigation hierarchy in the NPPF. So the priority is for on-site delivery of net gain, and then off-site, and then statutory credits are the last resort of last resorts. The government does intend that the sale of biodiversity units is an open market. So they very much are pushing a market approach to this. And that is perhaps why, I think partly maybe why we don't have a whole lot of guidance on how to do this from a planning authority perspective. So there is guidance, government has provided guidance for landowners who wish to sell units, for developers who wish to purchase units, but there's very little for planning authorities as to how we go about facilitating that process. And I would say one thing that we were sort of very mindful of when putting together our proposed sort of framework was due diligence. So while habitat banks they're not a planning application, so they cannot be sort of consulted on in the same way, we felt it was really necessary to review them and to review various criteria. We want to make sure, for example, that they are not going to be compromising existing assets, say archaeological assets. We want to make sure that they are not going to be prejudicing other land uses which might be in the local plan or in other, that kind of thing. So part of one of the appendices to the report, for example, is what we sort of see as our protocol for evaluating the information that's submitted, what information we require, how we evaluate that, and how the council can decide whether to support a proposal for a habitat bank, and then also who we would want to notify about proposals, because again, we think that's part of the due diligence. If somebody wants to have a habitat bank next to, say, an ancient monument, we think that Historic England probably would, we think it's worth that they should know about that, and so we've got the notification protocol as well. So that's part of this framework. We have consulted in sort of developing this framework. We've looked at what other authorities are doing, and there's quite a wide range. Buckinghamshire Council is probably the leader in this. Warwickshire not far behind. But Andra and I had a meeting with Peterborough a couple weeks ago and realized that actually they're taking a very different approach to this and seeing this really as a market facilitation kind of exercise. So they're not doing it. They don't sort of see the due diligence aspect that we're kind of considering. So there are different approaches out there, and I would say that we would very much welcome and love to have comments on what, your thoughts on whether, if you don't necessarily agree with this approach, by all means, please let us do, because this isn't the only one, and there isn't a lot of guidance, and so the more brains, the better, I think.
Such as they are. No, thank you, Heather, and thank you, Simon, for the introduction to this. It is interesting, isn't it? And I do fully understand the hierarchy which you articulated. And obviously, if you can do your biodiversity net gain on site, then that would absolutely be a preferable option. Or if it's then it's developers making gains off-site on other land within their control, or at least in the North Northamptonshire area, and then, of course, maybe further afield. And the habitat banking operation is interesting, isn't it? Because it gives, due diligence is important. What is it that these habitat banks are doing? What is the biodiversity net gain, and how can we ensure that it's still there in 30 years' time? So it's quite a complex operation, and obviously Appendix C with the fee proposal does at least give some clarity to the fact that there will be quite a detailed amount of monitoring and making sure that things are maintained in that period of time. So, very interesting report. So I'll throw it open to the floor. Steve, please. Then Mark.
Thank you, Chair. It is a very interesting report. I have to say it did take a while to get the full handle, but thanks on it. So thanks again for the presentation as well. I'm going to start with a really stupid question, Chair, but I've got other points I'll make as the debate goes on.
No such thing on this committee.
The first thing I couldn't get right at the beginning is the why. Why we're getting involved at all, because the way I read this, if a developer can't do the required legal and can obviously purchase credits on habitat banks, what I can't get from this paper is why the council has to have a role at all, why a developer just can't go straight to a company providing the land banks and buy and use those units and purchase it, and I couldn't get that through any of the report. And just very quickly, Chair, you know, when entering 106 agreements, one thing you and I both know, and it's nothing to do with this new council, all the legacy councils had very, very poor 106 policies, and they are incredibly out of date. I mean, historically, at least 10 years out of date, and you know, East Northampton was one of the worst ones, just for the age of it. And if we do go into this, Chair, I mean, one thing I would comment is we really do need to get a handle on our suite of 106s and actually go through and get it right, because they, as I said, no fault to this new authority, but they are so out of date and don't deliver what 106s should for this council. But that's just a secondary point on 106s. My main point is obviously my first question.
Well, thank you. Before I come back to Heather, I mean, I agree with you about 106 agreements. If you are going to enter into a legally binding agreement, then it's got to be enforced on both sides, and everybody's got to do what they say that they are going to do. And maybe, as you say, in some of the legacy councils, that has not always been meticulously observed. And we all know some. We've all got our favourite examples. But no, thank you. But back to your first question. Yes, indeed. Why? Heather.
Thank you for actually bringing that up, because I have been working on this for so long that it sometimes is easy to lose sight of what the reader is missing. So I will be sure to add that to the next iteration. So in order for a habitat bank to sell units to a developer, it has to be on a national register, the National Biodiversity Gain Sites Register. In order to get onto that register, it must have either a Section 106 with a planning authority or a conservation covenant with a responsible body. So that is why we are suggesting that the council would want to do one or the other. To do neither, then the council would sort of lose control of what habitat banks are emerging and how they're emerging in North Northamptonshire. But it's really to facilitate their getting onto that register so that they can sell their units.
Just very quickly, Chair, thank you, because that just gives out a complete understanding of why, because as I said, I couldn't get the why. So thank you. That's all right.
Okay, I'm going to ask Mark to speak, but Jenny, I have seen your hand, so you're next. But Mark, then Anne.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That's a very interesting report, and I'm so pleased that you go through all that yourselves and we don't have to do all that work, quite frankly. I kind of go with what Steve has said. I mean, the why, I kind of get the why anyway. However, there are several things here. I kind of think we're looking at what we're offering or what we're suggesting here. We're either doing it collectively, and we are doing it, and therefore I believe we should be in charge of it if that's the case. Now, if we're in charge of it, I would hate to think that we are putting, allowing, if you like, it to go, the purchases to go out of the county, to go out of our unitary authority. We need to be in control of it and have it in our unitary authority, in my opinion. The sort of a question with this, though, but bear with me. I kind of look at this and think, like we do in planning, when we go out and we ask for who wants a site to be built on. That, we do that normally. We say, as part of our sequencing, we'll go out to people and say, looking for more housing development areas. Is that something we might consider doing in respect to seeing if we can get people to go for the banking, the biodiversity banking within the unitary authority? That was one point I thought might be of interest. If we're not, I worry about enforcement. If I'm honest, I really worry. Our enforcement, quite frankly, really is very poor. And that's no disrespect to anybody. It just is very poor. And I worry that if we have to enforce, it's never going to get done. We're going to lose out, and it's going to be very costly for us. And that, of course, involves the Section 106 side of things. So the conservation covenants, is that something that takes it out of our responsibility altogether? And if so, whose responsibility does it become?
So the council could become a responsible body and offer conservation covenants. So for the Habitat Bank provider, the conservation covenant really offers a different route. Basically, it's a different option for them. And also, non-planning authorities can become responsible bodies. So wildlife trusts could do it. So really, it's just about offering more options. Some planning authorities have become responsible bodies. Warwickshire County Council, I believe, is one of them. That is, I think, in part to provide this alternate route, the Conservation Covenant, but also because some planning authorities are looking to deliver biodiversity net gain on their own land, and they can't have a Section 106 with themselves, so they would have a Conservation Covenant with like a reciprocal arrangement with another council. If somebody at Habitat Bank in North Northamptonshire wanted to go for a conservation covenant, they would have to approach a responsible body for that, and there's no requirement to involve the council in that. So the council would effectively lose all control over it. Now, you would hope and expect that where, say they went to Warwickshire County Council, that they would do some kind of notification, talk to the neighbours, that kind of thing. But there's no requirement to do so.
Can I come back on that, David? So on the Conservation Covenant, as an authority, if we were to take that up and we became, if you like, the land banking side of it, on the Covenant, where do we stand if somebody breaks the rules again? Do we still look at going down, not a Section 106, but do we still look at having to go to courts and things? What do we do?
That's probably a better question for legal.
Right.
Actually, we would be, even if we are not entering it, even if we are at arm's length on this, we're still the local planning authority and the regulatory authority, so we would still have a role in enforcement, even if it was a totally private agreement between a developer and a biodiversity net gain bank.
The enforcement is on who or which body has the agreement with the Habitat Bank that allows them to get on the register. So if the council if a Habitat Bank has a Section 106 agreement with the council, the enforcement is on the council. If the Habitat Bank has a conservation covenant with a responsible body, it is the responsible body that is the enforcement body. For the purposes of planning for an application, the developer just needs to show that they have purchased the units. So that's kind of all they have to do. So when we talk about Section 106, it's a bit sort of weird to get our heads around because it's not the typical Section 106 that's associated with a planning application. These are being referred to often as floating Section 106s because it's a completely separate legal agreement. I will say that because you asked about, or Councillor North asked about the structure of the Section 106 and the efficiency of it. The Planning Advisory Service commissioned a piece of work from Denton's to come up with template Section 106s to do with biodiversity net gain and some template condition wording. Our legal has that, and it's sort of regarded as a starting point. They're not saying this is definitive, but here are sort of what they consider things that would need to be concerned. I know that Sarah Fayez in our legal has looked at this and thinks maybe some of the force majeure isn't as strong as it could be, and she would maybe want to alter the wording, but we have something to start with that has been provided by PAS.
Of course, the overarching legal context is a little bit blurry because it's over the legislation's only been enacted in September from the previous government. We're also consulting on a revised national planning policy framework, which may or may not have changes, perhaps, in the overarching context. So, as you rightly say in your report, a lot of this is yet to be legally tested. Okay. Jenny, sorry, you've been patient. Everybody's been patient so far. Jenny, please.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. Sorry, the phone will stop. I think Councillor Deering has raised the points that I had noted down, but I think my main concern is the word control. when we lose control, when it goes outside our control, it makes life a lot more difficult. At page 11, for instance, 8.4.2, enforcement is a huge issue for us presently, and has been. And so going forward, this is just an extra problem, and I think I don't quite see why, if the landowner fails to deliver their obligations, then the cost falls to us because we have to enforce something that they should have done. I can see some huge problems. I know we've got to go one way or the other, I'm assuming. I just do not like particularly the covenants route because, as the officer said, there's no requirement to involve us as an authority. And once you lose control, once you don't have control of a situation, it makes life really difficult. So it's just a comment, really. Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you, Jenny. I think you make an important point. While we will always be the local planning authority in terms of planning, it would be an additional chunk of responsibility to get involved in a private agreement between a developer and a biodiversity net gain habitat bank operator to enforce what is essentially a private contract between those two parties. So if we were to have to do that, then, and I do see the danger, because, you know, we're talking about 30-year duration contracts. This isn't short-term stuff. So if we, if we did have to do that, then, yeah, there would be a considerable potential responsibility and cost to the council. Yeah, Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry. I just want to also, around that conversation about conservation covenants, also bring up one of the unintended consequences that might happen through that route. So we know that BNG is mandatory, that every development is going to have to provide it. We need to ensure that either us or we have enough sites to be able to provide that 10% as locally as possible. So if a habitat bank was to go to a responsible body to secure a conservation covenant, that responsible body doesn't have to take it on. If we're not in the place where we can sign Section 106s, those habitat banks have nothing to come forward with. They can't get on the register. So the risk is that we don't end up with any habitat banks in our particular area. It's a risk, it might not happen. And then we're looking at the biodiversity net gain going outside of the authority area, or it starts to stall development. And that's where the risks multiplier starts to increase, because it could then impact on our 5-year supply. I'm not saying any of that could happen, but it's a risk to think through as we're talking about the pros and cons of the council getting involved and the concern around enforcement, which we've tried to work in some fees through that.
I see.
Set out in the appendix, but we'd also have wording in the Section 106 to come to resolutions across the 30 years. So that was something we picked up from looking at the Peterborough example, that how they would, so you're monitoring after year 7, it's not quite where you anticipate it, so you might put in some mechanisms. They might reevaluate the habitat management plan to see where they're going. So there's ways of managing it when it's within the council. You're quite right that if it's external to the council, we start to lose control, we start to lose that due diligence, and there are those sort of risks in the future if we don't play a part, I feel, play a part in providing habitat banks within our area. And just one point about the call for sites that was raised by Councillor. We did consider doing a call for sites for environmental reasons, or environmental purposes, a little while ago, but we felt it was going to conflict with when we were doing the call for sites for the local plan review. So we didn't want to sort of muddy the water when that was going on. But actually, through that call for sites for the local plan review, we did get some sites coming back saying, we want to use this for environmental and nature recovery. Not many, but a few.
And one, taking it up a step, rather, one difficulty with the policy that all developments throughout England and Wales provide 10% biodiversity net gain at all times is that eventually you're going to run out of sites. And so how are you going to fulfill the conflicting obligations of the government's drive for growth in housing and economic development and a constant stream of 10% biodiversity net gain throughout the country? I mean, I'm not quite sure where we're going to be in 10, 20 years' time if we're still on this path. But anyway, that's more of a philosophical point than operational on this matter. Right, Anne next, please.
Thank you. Very interesting paper. I have found some studies, because this has already happened in other countries. I found some studies, and I will put there's one particular study in the Netherlands, from the Netherlands, that I will put through a translation tool because I consider it very interesting. On the whole, the balance or the judgment, the assessments appear to be favorable to these habitat banks. On condition that all the safeguards are there, but it appears to be a favorable initiative to do this. Now, the concerns I've got, or the things we will need to take into consideration, is in the hierarchy. Yes, having those banks in North Northamptonshire is very important, as far as I'm concerned. Not just on-site, off-site, somewhere else. It's important that we have those in North Northamptonshire, particularly because of the logistics factor, the fact our county already risks being tarmacked over for the sake of warehouses. Then what else? Yes, like for unlike is a concern that the biodiversity will shift to particular species that didn't exist originally, or that just that the balance will shift. So that's something to be taken into consideration. An ecologist would need to be very careful about the balance. Then the longevity, 30 years. I'd be concerned that loss of biodiversity would just be deferred for 30 years. And there have been examples in America and Canada where such sites were then sold for development, very attractive developments, in fact, but that's not what we want. So monitoring is needed, enforcement, that's already been mentioned a few times. It's something I'm very concerned about. And apparently these sites would need to be embedded in the local plan. The local plan would need to be adjusted. That's been mentioned by the LGA, on the LGA side as well. So yes, due diligence is important. But this is a very good paper, and I liked the factor, where it said we need a statement to make sure that it's not contaminated land that's being put forward, because I found a site for landowners who are interested in this sort of thing, and it said, well, it's a prime way to use a plant that you can't use for anything else. So yes, we need to carefully assess the quality of the land. These are just some of the factors, but I think we can learn a lot from what has been done elsewhere. I think it's a positive move, so thank you to the officers for putting together this paper.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Anne. I think those comments are very useful as well. And it'd be interesting to see your Netherlands study, because, again, densely populated area, not much land, not much spare land, and they've got a lot of the same difficulties we have. So that would be quite interesting. And also the point you quite rightly raised about 5.10 on the various information that is required to identify a biodiversity net gain site, including, as you say, contaminated land and all the other bullet points that are put out there. So very interesting. coming. But Jenny, is that a legacy hand or is that a new hand, as they say?
No, it's not. It's a new one,
Oh.
Chair. So, and apologies because the phone went when Anne was speaking. So I'd be really interested, Anne, if you could share that study from the Netherlands. I certainly tried to look myself, but failed miserably, I'm afraid. Can I just come back on a point that Andrew made about call for sites, and having chatting to somebody at the weekend, I just wondered how many sites we possibly have at the moment in Northants. I couldn't find anywhere that said how many we have or could have. And I think you said, Andrew, that there was a small amount. Can you just clarify a bit more than that?
Well, thank you, Jenny. Heather?
Sure. We have three, so what we would describe as shovel-ready sites. So they are ready to go. One is a parkland site at Dingley. They're looking to restore the historic parkland. It's the grassland, really. There is one at Polbrook Airfield.
Polbrook, yeah.
Yep. And then there is a farm, sort of arable reversion near Rushden. There are a couple of others that are coming forward, but they're in the sort of incipient stages. The Environment Bank, which is one company that some developers look to, currently has no sites in Northamptonshire at all. There is one that they are looking to progress in West Northamptonshire, but there's nothing in North Northamptonshire.
Okay, well, thank you.
If I could
Right,
just come back
thank you.
on,
Yeah, Heather, carry on.
can I just come back on one of the questions about the criteria and what we're looking at with contaminated land things? One of the questions that I've had as I've been doing this, and this is something that I think I particularly welcome some advice on, is under what circumstances the council, assume the council decides that it would like to try to facilitate habitat banks using Section 106. The council receives a proposal. Under what circumstances would the council say, no, we are not prepared to do this, for reasons of we think it's going to be an enforcement difficulty, or we think it's just not the right place, or they could still go to a responsible body for conservation covenant, but I think it needs to be clear what the red lines are, and that's not something that we really have answers to at the moment.
No, I think
it needs some thought, I think.
I think that's interesting because obviously there are a number of criteria that you indicate at 5.10, but they're not all necessarily disqualifying, are they? I guess it's in the nature of the beast. You'd have to look at it on its own, like any planning application. You'd have to look at it on its own merits, and while there may be some criteria which appear here that affect that site, it might still nevertheless be reasonable to go forward. That's certainly where I would come from.
Yeah, I think, Chair, as well, that a planning application has certain parameters that
Yeah,
it doesn't
so.
accord with the policy, but habitat banks aren't there's no structure, there's no regulatory structure for them. So this is really a policy that the council would need to create to say these are the circumstances under which we would not support it. And in the absence of a regulatory framework, that makes those decisions kind of tricky. This is why we're trying to be careful with our language and not call them applications, but call them proposals, because they're not planning applications and they aren't treated as such and they aren't subject to consultation. And so we're trying to be very careful and clear with the language that we're using to really set out that this is a different animal entirely.
Indeed.
For the council to consider.
I mean, it would require the Habitat Bank promoter to provide initial information to enable the council to consider the following and all of the criteria listed. While it doesn't have an overarching regulatory framework as planning does, you are still entering into a legally binding contract. And if that legally binding contract has been entered into, taking into consideration the criteria that are listed, and perhaps the one or two that aren't, but who knows, then that's fine. And then you have entered into that contract, and it can be enforced on the basis of the contractual agreement that you've entered into. There may be a regulatory framework that emerges, but it doesn't seem to have done so yet. Does that help at all? Probably not.
It does. I think in some cases it might raise more questions than it answers. So, for example, what if, say, a promoter came forward and they said, we're going to propose this habitat bank in an area where actually the council is maybe looking to extend an urban extension. You know, people will try to use these as hostile proposals in some cases. And so then I think we get into these questions of how do we say, does the council want to say no? And so I think these kinds of things could be used. And yeah, so it can get quite tricky.
And clearly, if the council has an interest in the land, or a different developer has an interest in a land that somebody is proposing for a biodiversity net gain site, then that would be a matter of discussion between. But no, I mean, I know, I see what you mean. It certainly sets up a pitfall. Are you going to help us here, Mark?
Yeah,
No, you're not. You're going to disappear.
I'll try for you, Chair. We have local development plan. We know where we're building. We know what sites aren't built on, but we're looking to propose as sites for building. Maybe part of this, I hope I'm understanding this right, by the way, Heather, that maybe part of this is that we say land that's for development or proposed for development cannot become. So we're saying we're putting it the other way, cannot become used as a land bank for biodiversity, because coming back to what Anne has said, if we allow it and then in 10 years' time a developer comes along and they get development on it, we've lost it. So actually it's making use of almost non-usable land, if that makes sense. But I think where we're looking to allow development from that point of view, I think that should be excluded from any biodiversity net gain banking.
I think that actually did help us somewhat, and thank you. Okay, Steve, I'm so sorry. We've been slightly ignoring you at the end there.
No, sorry, just making sure I hadn't forgotten what I was going to mention and ask.
Well, we were doing our best.
I'll do my best to remember. If I lose it on the way, it's because I forgot what I was going to ask. But thank you anyway, Chair.
We're all getting older.
Just on a couple of points from previous speakers. One of my concerns is something that Anne raised, and obviously we've got ecology specialists here today. That, you know, I think everybody obviously knows that you know, species or plants where they aren't static, and it's you know, it's what net gain in biodiversity. And I mean, so I suppose one of the things is what are we short for? And on flip that on its head, what could we have too much of in relation to certain types of species? And because you could be just protecting certain types of.
Absolutely.
So I suppose one of the big things is, and one of the things that I've asked about what we could turn things down on, we could say we've got enough grassland for this particular species that is using that habitat. We could just, and if I use, it might be a bad ecology, but analogy, but there are some comments in the last couple of years that we've now got too many red kites. Well, we encourage them back. So what I'm saying is you could have too much of one species, which isn't actually delivering you biodiversity net gain, because it's not diverse, of course. Yeah. It's just one particular area. So I remembered that one. The other thing I remembered in relation to what Mark said, and I hope you got that right, because you just particularly mentioned covenants. The other thing I was going to mention in relation to the council is we're a big landowner. And one of the things, again, I might have missed it, however, but one of the things in here in relation to that is not just around covenants, but I just wondered why we couldn't actually supply habitat banks ourselves and sell them and get obviously getting, and actually, for count. Hopefully local government will be here for some time, and that does give some control on actually on longevity, and it won't be developed on if the council owns it. And as I said, we're one of the biggest landowners, so I think Mark's particular points were on covenants rather than what I just mentioned, in actually doing it ourselves and having control of the whole thing. And as I said, we've got sites. The other one, because I did remember all three.
There you go.
Because I had three so far to mention. 5.6, You were talking earlier about the longevity and the cost of monitoring over the period of time. And I'll read there, obviously, that actually all upfront costs are including the management and monitoring. Because I think there was obviously some talk earlier about the cost to this council of actually enforcement and monitoring those sites. Apologies if I read the papers, so I couldn't actually, and it's my fault, but I couldn't zoom in on Appendix C. So if it's in there, I apologise, but it's just, obviously over 30 years, it surely must be very hard to get that cost basis over a 30-year period. I mean, I just don't see how possible that is in relation to bringing that all in front. At some point in time, the body monitoring that is going to start losing money, because I don't think inflation and everything else, and I think things would change so much over a period of time. I just think that's impossible to work out. I mean, that last one is just a comment. Obviously, the other two were questions. So.
Your last comment, I agree with. I mean, because of course, different sites will have completely different monitoring regimes anyway. Some sites are a lot easier to monitor than others. And I do also very much appreciate biodiversity. So it is something that needs to be considered going forward in that 30-year period, perhaps, as to what biodiversity is being protected or enhanced during, so it should be a bit of a living agreement. So it shouldn't be, to use your analogy, it shouldn't be necessarily a site for developing, for breeding red kites. Because in 30 years' time, we might not be able to have an ice cream without having, 50 red kites coming down on us, or whatever it may be. So, absolutely, I think that's an important point. Heather, did you want to?
Sure. Yeah, the issue of habitats that you might have short supply of and surplus of, there's actually been a recent analysis that's been done by, I'm not sure who, I can't remember who it was, but I saw it recently on LinkedIn. And so there are some habitats that are in very short supply. Things like open mosaic habitat on previously developed land, which is like lovely brownfield. It's nice brownfield, ecologically important brownfield, which we actually have a Polwark Airfield is proposing, because that is a previously developed site that can restore some of that. So that's a very short supply, a habitat in very short supply. So, and places like the Wirral are really struggling with that, because those are all developable areas, and they need that habitat. The metric requires that they have trading rules inbuilt, so you must deliver something of equal distinctiveness or better. So you can't, for example, grub up a piece of nice woodland and then replace it with, acres and acres of, amenity grass, for example. So there are surplus habitats. So there are a lot on the market, the small market that currently exists for habitat, like habitat banks. There's a lot of other neutral grassland that's being offered out there. I think the idea that government has is that because this is a market, it will find its kind of equilibrium, and promoters and providers will start looking to provide the habitats that are harder to deliver. I will say also that the metric, biodiversity net gain is really about the habitats, not the species. So if somebody wanted to have, say, a red kite breeding, this is really great for red, I get, like, as an illustrative kind of point, it's not something that would be considered as a benefit. I will also say, as an ecologist, it is likely that their population will crash at some point. So we are in the boom part of that cycle. The costs bit. So the appendix, this is something that ours is based on one that Bucks Council has developed, because they've got a big team working on this biodiversity net gain. They've got an Environment Act readiness manager and all sorts. So people tend to look to them. Now, the way that the costs for monitoring are calculated are based on a combination of site size and complexity. So something that's quite straightforward, something like easy to deliver, like reed bed, if it's small, is going to have fewer monitoring requirements over visits, whereas something that is large, complex, has a lot of different habitats, will require more visits, more monitoring reports, that kind of thing over time. So consequently, the costs are higher. And the Excel workbook that Bucks put together sort of factors that out. And then We've got 3.5%, I believe, inflation has been worked in. Now, again, as you say, this is like to some degree, right? These are the known unknowns in Rumsfeld terms. It's kind of it's the best we can do. A lot of this is really and I've always sort of said from the beginning that there's really going to have to be a lot of monitoring of the process, monitoring of the finances, and really this is where an adaptive management approach is going to be needed. So that if the council's finding that actually the fees aren't looking to cover it, then right away you review them and increase. I think because there is so little sort of history to this yet, this is so new, nobody really knows the answer. And so I think it's important, and I suppose that's an additional burden on the council has to manage the process as well and monitor that and make sure that we're on top of it.
Yeah. And well, certainly, as you say, some known unknowns here. I think there's a few unknown knowns, but
Chair, sorry, just my last question. No, in relation to the other one I asked, unless Heather wasn't finished.
No.
No, I'm going to defer to Andra because she was involved in this action.
Because I'm really keen on that.
Okay.
Thank you. So yeah, in relation to council-owned sites and using our own land as habitat banks, so it's something that we wanted to do and have looked at and had discussions with at officer level. But as Heather's mentioned earlier, we can't enter into our own Section 106 with ourselves to secure it to go onto the National Register. So, I know, this is an unintended consequence of how the legislation was set out and the process was set out. But what they have said over the last 6 months is that you could look to have reciprocal agreements with another unitary authority. That means we could enter into discussions with somebody else that would sign the Section 106 for us. We could then in turn sign the Section 106s for them. So yes, it's a way of doing it. It's slightly more complicated, but could give us a really good opportunity of looking at our sites.
So if I
And,
could just,
another
sorry.
bit of work that we did very early on in the process, and we used some of our BNG grant because the government has given us some money each year to help us implement BNG in its various guises, was to commission a study to look at council-owned land, and we looked at 3 pilot sites throughout the authority on what could be achieved on those, given a few different options. It talked to the Parks and Environment team about what the cost to implement that was, so we then had a calculator on what the cost to us would be. We could then factor in a risk contingency that the costs have gone up. We are still covering that. So what you're charging your unit at is full cost recovery. So including any management machinery, anything that is needed for you to deliver that unit. And that's what all the habitat banks are doing. So we do have that piece of work, but it has stalled for resource reasons, complexity reasons, but it's something that is on our work programme to review and consider because we do have lots of opportunities out there.
Thank you, Jeff. I'll just come back. I mean, thank you very much for that answer, because I did wonder, and again, I know I couldn't see it in here, and I just thought, well, as I said, why not? We're one of the biggest landowners in North Northants, so, you know, we could have done. So that is just, I have to say, yeah, that is just typical of any government, or I'm afraid, or civil service. I said yesterday health was complicated. That was complicated as well. They don't make it easy for us. That's what I have to say.
Can we not, if we identified sites of biodiversity net gain in our own land holdings, can we not allocate them? And as you know, I think you were mentioning it, and if you like, sell them to another either developer or another local authority in a reciprocal arrangement.
Yes, I'd say a couple of things about that. So first, doing a council habitat bank is something other local authorities are doing. It's probably a lot of work, which is one of the reasons that it probably would have stalled. The council certainly can, though, in principle and can calculate the cost of the units, can offer them up. And I think one of the nice things about council-owned land in general is it tends to not be super great habitat. It's not really ecologically rich, but there's going to be a lot of need. Not everybody needs a lowland meadow offset. There's going to be a lot of need for things like scrub and kind of, you know, middling quality grassland. You know, if you're developing on a pretty rubbish site, you're not going to pay a whole pile of money to deliver something like really fancy. You just, all you need to do is trade up. What I also think I need to point out is that planning authorities cannot prioritize their own habitat banks. So that it's a market, and the developer can go to whoever will suit their needs, deliver for the cost that they are prepared to pay. It is a market, so the council cannot promote its own. The council cannot even, in fact, require, and in policy terms, so we could not, in the new local plan, say that offsets need to be delivered in Northamptonshire where possible. It is a market, yeah, and that's something I saw the other day on one of the lawyers that I sort of follow.
That's quite interesting.
It is quite interesting. This is we have to kind of, this is a market approach. So. No, obviously, as members and as residents, you wouldn't want that.
I saw a look of wild alarm crossing Anne's face there.
Absolutely, but that's how it's been designed.
Right, okay. Mark?
Thank you, Chair. So I sort of going on what Steve said and what you've just said now, Heather, I think what's probably important, and I'd be like Andy, I cannot believe we have to take all the houses with no benefit as such, if you were looking at it from the worst case scenario. So I just still come back to what I said earlier. Why can't we put our own land up for specific, if you like, species, whatever it is, and put out a request for other landowners, and if we could put together a list of what we're looking for, grasslands, whatever it is, we can then allocate that, and we can say, right, these are the areas. That area can have has to have grassland only, as an example. I don't know if you get too deep on that, but where you can say you've got to have this here and this here, and then we've got a bank. Now the fact remains, of course, and I hear what you're saying, that we can't say to the developer, you have to buy that within our authority. But once we set all that up ourselves, it's open for anyone to buy from any other authority as well. So there is a benefit to us in getting this done our way and having that sort of control. Now, and that brings me to the pricing, if I might. Because it's an open market, are we saying that anybody can price basically what they like for the land? Because if we are, then you're into, as I said, a market analysis of, well, they're going to charge us X per square, whatever, and you're charging us Y, which is a lot more. So that is an issue which brought me to what you've got here on page 27, on the appendix. I wanted to understand the pricing on this, because this is presumably an example of what you're suggesting we do, or is it not? Page 27 on the appendix.
That is for the monitoring fee. So that is not to deliver habitats. The average in this area is about £35,000 a unit.
A unit?
Per unit. Yeah, that's right.
That's what a unit is.
So just explain to me, so if
What's
somebody decided to build 42 houses, where would that stand in here? Because it looks like this is going on land size.
That is the fee that we propose, or the type of structure of the fee that we propose, that the council, if the council wants to sort of facilitate a habitat bank, of course, then we assume the responsibility for monitoring that and enforce it to make sure it's delivering what the habitat management and monitoring plan says it's going to do. And what you've got in front of you is what we reckon, on the best of our knowledge, would be the cost for the council to do that over the 30 years. So that is simply to monitor another habitat bank.
That's a one-off fee to monitor.
That's right.
That's what we're saying.
That's right.
So what concerns me is viability and small places. I really getting concerned about this because, we seem to be in a position, or being put in a position by this government and other governments, that we are having to tax, find more money for stuff here. And I'm not anti this at all, don't get me wrong. But, you know, when you're looking at a small development that might be 10 or 15 properties, which if it were 50, anything above 10, as we know in planning terms, is Section 106, is social housing and money towards X, Y and Z, doctors, surgeons, etc., which makes them non-viable. So then we have to go down the route in planning where, okay, well, that one for 20 properties is non-viable, so we won't take any money for the NHS and the doctors and this and that, so that it becomes viable for them. This adds another issue to the viability of it, and that does concern me. So what do we do about, you know, where does this cut in? Does it, because I'm looking here and thinking, you're talking small, medium and large sizes, so actually, Joe Bloggs that's building one property on backland development is still going to be expected, presumably, to be paying this sort of thing. And it just becomes non-viable. So that then affects our planning and 5 plus, you know, our 6.5 years.
To be clear, the monitoring fee that is in that is recovered from the Habitat Bank provider. They pay the council, so that's not from the developer. Having said that, the Habitat Banks, their costs are built into the cost per unit. So they would have, you know, that would be...
So it's offset.
Yeah, it would be paid for ultimately by the developer, but it's not that the developer would be paying that fee.
Yeah.
That would be the fee between the council and the Habitat Bank.
But
the developer goes to the Habitat Bank and says, I
pays.
need 6 units. Can I have 6 units? And they give you a
But the
bill.
price of units will go up as the availability of sites decreases, because the problem with this thing is it's got a 10% built-in exponential growth. So you'll pick off the low-hanging fruit reasonably quickly, and then as we move down the line, with considerable increases in housing being proposed, I'm not talking about Northamptonshire, I'm talking about nationwide, very considerable increases in housing particularly, but also concomitant infrastructure and employment land and so on and so forth, all of which requires 10% biodiversity net gain. The costs of these units will go up and up and up. And there goes your viability argument. And it'll squeeze out any of the, you know, any but the largest developers who've got the ability to run their cash flow to meet that. And, you know, this is one of the unintended consequences. I mean, it's a great idea, but there is going to be a limit to it.
Yeah, I would say it's so, from what I have seen generally with applications that have come, I mean, the big developers, we're building on farmland right now. We're not building so much on great habitat. We're building on farmland. So the unit requirements, the amount of biodiversity net gain to be delivered, probably it's easier to deliver on site because your baseline is quite low. So to go up 10% on something that's very low is actually not that big a deal. And it's, you know, Persimmon can go out and buy a whole bunch of farm fields.
Yeah, they can.
I do see an issue though with these smaller builders, and part of the reason for that is because they tend to be building on back garden sites where you've got priority habitats like traditional orchards. I've had sites like that, and it's where the uplift is not really possible. They can't really do it on site because it's the whole site. You've got a priority habitat, they have to offset it, and those are significant costs. For the small developers, and this is, you know, people are talking about this in the industry as well, this is where it's really hitting. Householders are exempt, permitted development is exempt, so there are some exemptions for the very small custom and self-build, but it's the sort of 10 to 30 dwellings, it can be significant, and you know, the smaller site, you know, Rushton is a particular area where we've got sites that are allocated, for example, in the neighborhood plan, are sites with significant ecology interest, and so then it gets even more difficult to deliver the net gain. It's a real, it's difficult. I'm not like.
If I might, David, just coming back on this, this is, as I said, it's a real concern, and we have to be, from our point of view, this is a policy that we're putting together. I do think that we need to almost take the route of 10 or less houses is not included in biodiversity, because most of those are not on typical the backland brownfield developments. I mean, if you come into Desborough, right in the town centre, I think it's about 12 houses being built. They can't put hedges and stuff there. So if you were saying to them, well, you'll have to go and buy, and the cost is extortionate from their point of view, it's non-viable. So it doesn't get built. So how does that help us in building more houses? It does, I don't know if there's a way that around almost being able to sort of limit it or not.
No, there's
Well,
no,
we
there's
can't,
no
because
flexibility.
it's in the Act. From April, even minor developments are subject to the Biodiversity Net Gain Act. So it's law.
Yeah.
Can I say?
With some exemptions, no doubt. Sorry, Steve. I know you're. Yeah, very good. Do you good patience?
Just one thing to say about the small sites. They will only probably have partial units that they need to buy. So it might be 0.5 of a unit.
Right.
So the figures aren't going to be astronomical because they're smaller sites in the first place. But I think this comes back to the point around council-owned land being put on the register, is that we will have lots of smaller parcels, and we would be in the market to facilitate selling smaller and partial units to these small house builders, encouraging our supply and continuing our supply. The habitat banks that we've got at the moment have hundreds of units. They don't really want to go through selling 0.5 of a unit here and there, because it doesn't work for their economies of scale, and that would put their price up. So it's a market. We can enter that market, and we could put it in a price that we might not be having as much contingency as we would like to give us certainty, but it still facilitates those smaller house builders being able to continue down the development process.
Right,
Something
thank
to
you.
consider.
Right, Steve, your turn.
Yes, and I still remember what I was on about, I think.
We're testing you today, aren't we?
If I pause my sentence, it means it's gone. I tend to agree with Councillor Deering generally, but I mean, the point he made a few minutes ago is, and I wrote viability down as well, because it's an incredible worrying scenario that, as has been said, we lose out already in other areas just to make things viable. And I think it was either the very last bit of the outgoing government or the new incoming government, but there was a thing a short period ago about concentrating on brownfield sites and delivering those first. Well, that's just what Heather said. That causes masses. It's huge. I mean, in a way, it was not good that the new local plan's been delayed, but in a way, in relation to this conversation today, that gives a time for I see an incredible piece of work, if you don't mind me saying, Simon, in how to link all this in, because we've got to deliver houses, and and it is smaller sites if that's what the new government is concentrating on brownfield, and how do we then make them viable? So that whole mesh of protecting the environment and biodiversity and delivering houses is very complicated, and what Andrew just said is also very interesting. If we come back to my earlier point, maybe if we're not doing it ourselves as owning the units for sale, then we may have to enter into agreement and offset some of our smaller sites and deliver the net gain. The other thing I was going to mention, Chair, as it's a market, as has been said, I think one of the issues maybe we could consider is that if it's supposed to be net gain and improving sites, if we are short on a particular habitat, that may actually be a way of delivering off-site gain for smaller sites, as it's supposed to be making an improvement on an area, if that makes any sense to you. Because I suppose it comes back to, again, is what we're trying to do with these sites and what we're short of in relation to actually what's the gain, and what type of gain is it to what kind of habitat or biodiversity, and then obviously are we short in areas of Northumberland, or is it a particular area of, because obviously it's quite a diverse area now. Obviously we're a unitary authority, so just food for thought on that one. But the point, Mark, is, going forward, how we deliver all that mesh of housing and is going to be incredibly interested.
Indeed it is, and everything else as well. And of course we're lucky, even a lot of authorities. Government have increased our housing targets by a mere 11%, and there are some authorities up and down the country who've been asked to increase their housing targets by 200%. So yeah, interesting. Andra?
Thank you, Chair. It kind of links on to the presentation I'm going to give after we finish this agenda
Oh, we're looking
item
forward to this one.
about the local nature recovery strategy. So we have identified the best locations, the areas that we do want to see where nature's recovered. And I won't go into it too much, but when we get to that presentation, there'll be the links between B&G and what we've identified in our draft strategy at the moment. So we are kind of going in that direction.
Thank you. Mark?
It was just a question, really, sort of going on my experience of stuff with building, etc. Will this also, because it sounds to me like it includes absolutely anything, so if somebody converts a building in a town centre to 6 flats, so it was a shop and uppers, as I say, and they convert it, say, into 6 flats, are they liable because they've made 6 new units?
I would say no, because there are thresholds below which biodiversity net gain is not required. And one of those is a de minimis habitat threshold. So if you are building on a car park, you're not losing any habitat of any value, so they don't have to deliver net gain.
Right.
So a conversion like that would qualify. Yeah, there's a lot of discussion. PAS has provided this kind of like discussion forum for local authority officers about this kind of, and there is a lot of discussion about under which circumstances variations are covered, and retrospective is another one. That's actually, people are starting to be naughty because retrospective applications are not covered. What kinds of conversions, changes of use, that kind of thing. So yes, where a habitat of very low distinctiveness, so basically hard standing, has not been less than 25 square meters or whatever meters of hedgerow, that's not affected. So your proposed conversion to flats of an existing building, assuming it does not involve taking up grass to provide paving or to provide parking, for example, that wouldn't be required. Yeah, it would be exempt.
Of course.
But just very briefly
It's
on
interesting.
that. And that's good to know, purely because there's an awful lot of commercial to residential permitted development happening around the country now, and it's the big thing that's the big thing now. And there's not a lot of money in this. People really don't get it. To convert something now, 60 to 70,000 pounds just to make one flat in a building, and if the building's worth 100,000, if the flat's worth 100,000 pounds, 40 grand in it. But then when you take all the other costs involved, there's very little money left in it for them.
Yeah.
So it's good to hear that. And the other thing, just brief on that, was warehousing, commercial. Are all the warehousing sites involved in this? Do they have to?
Yes,
Yeah,
employment
okay.
is covered as well. Minerals and waste is covered as well, everything. Yeah.
Steve?
Thank you, Chair. Be pleased these are my last few questions.
Oh, no. I thought you were just warming up.
Well, one thing I don't know to say is, and I was suggesting we were doing it for actually helping out in relation to land banks of the council. From a market point of view, it's very interesting how actually people are even providing those land banks, because I don't see, well, it's naive of it, but I don't see where they're making the money, because if the agreement is with in relation to paying the monitoring for the 30 years up front is with the people who hold the land banks and not the developer in relation to payments, and the 1 in 6 is, or the payments for the monitoring, as you said earlier, is with the company who owns the thing. That's an incredible cost they're paying up front. And one question I've got with that is, what if they go bust? Who pays? Because the developer's still developing.
Yeah,
So,
good point.
the only last two, Chair, I've got,
Right,
unless I think of something else, but I'm sure you'll want to move on at some point.
presently.
As you know, in Nen Valley, we've got the triple SI,
Yeah.
which obviously gives a 6 mile exclusion and all the mitigation, and you can't do anything in that site. I just don't know how that reflects into relation to the net gain and how that works with this. And the only other one, Chair, is we've got obviously Sue's agreed in the last plan before this came in. Obviously the Russian one's got nowhere near going forward, but these two have, which is obviously Hamwood Park and the Wellingborough one. Are they being caught by this with later on, or have they got away from not? Because I mean they're huge, so have they got away with not delivering anything, or is it coming back as reserved matters?
That's a very interesting question, because they are, as you say, I mean, Stanton Cross, Hanwood Park, by them, and Glenvale, but by themselves are very substantial. I mean, clearly, Rushton Sue, hasn't become a planning application yet, so it would be certainly taken up because it has to be. But to what extent is this retrospective, if at all?
So biodiversity net gain applies to planning permissions, so that's full and outline. It does not apply to reserve matters. So where there has already been an application sorted, then an outline that it's not covered. You do get some weird situations. I know in Northampton, for example, one of the urban extensions there, that the whole thing was secured by outline, so the reserve matters for the parcels are coming forward. However, there's like a little sort of village community center that was its own full application, and so it was subject to PNG. So you do get these weird ones, but where new urban extensions are coming forward, developers they've known about this for a long time. They're incorporating that into their design, into their site design. So I think with Glenvale Park, we've got, they're delivering their BNG on site. So where developers are able to do that, that's preferable. I mean, significant on-site still needs to be secured by a legal agreement, whether that's a condition or Section 106, but it's a different kind of Section 106 to what we're discussing here.
I know that Stanton Cross, that Stanton Cross has done some biodiversity work, even though its outline planning permission was granted way back in the mists of time. Whether that is in accordance with 10% biodiversity net gain as it currently is now enacted, I don't know.
It probably isn't.
No, probably not.
The issue of the special protection area and the mitigation fee for, it's additional to, so biodiversity net gain is additional to that. So again, they either have to deliver on site, irrespective, as long as they're in that, currently 3 kilometer zone, extending to 5.9 kilometer zone. So they are completely separate. There is some talk about the ability for landowners to do stacking. So you deliver for multiple benefits at the same time, and can you, to what extent you can do that? That's something that's still being discussed within DEFRA and under what kinds of stacking would be acceptable. And as for what if the habitat bank goes bust, that is something that came up in the discussions with legal, but I don't remember what we were investigating a bond, but yeah, that is something that I don't think we've got to.
No, that's
You have to ask legal, really. I'm just the ecologist.
Oh, okay. We can ask legal. They're probably busy, but yes, okay.
Actually,
Steve?
that is interesting, though, because that
It
would
is.
obviously make quite a fundamental thing about the whole thing. Thank you for your answers. I think, again, back to the viability. I mean, Chair, that southern end of the Nen Valley, the Rushton area, obviously the Nen Valley goes straight through the bottom end of North Northants, and I'm very much for supporting biodiversity and what we're trying to do. But in relation to coming back to the viability, anywhere around that zone, including Rushton, of course, which hits that 6 mile corridor of development, that's a huge, and I'm saying I'm not disagreeing with what we're trying to do with environment and biodiversity, but doubling, the mitigation for the triple SI and the biodiversity net gain, that's an incredible cost in relation to all the other costs back to viability. And again, the Rushton, I come from Rushton, Heather, so that's why I know. The border, obviously with Bedfordshire, it's actually getting quite tight now in relation to what can actually be delivered. So if you take all those on costs, and we're looking at infill in relation to brownfield sites, I'm just saying, Joe, you know, when we're looking at our new local plan and housing delivery, there's some real costs coming in there to make a lot of this viable.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. There's an awful lot of pressure on the small and medium developers here, and the big ones, to be honest, because although they've got more capacity, they also have more pressure. So, you know, it is a problem. There's an awful lot of expectation, and it's right that it should be so, but there is an awful lot of expectation being put on developers, and at the time when there is a desire for a lot more housing delivery, and making it more difficult, plus all the other stuff, you know, the other stuff, you know, about increased costs of working with national insurance and so on, it's going to be difficult. It really is. Yeah, please.
Just say, so slightly off topic, but the mitigation fee for the special protection area, that's a few £100 a dwelling. And when we took it to the local, we took it to examination at the last local plan, developers were fine with that. I mean, this needs to be recalculated because while the zone has increased, the mitigation required to sort of absorb that recreational pressure will change. So again, the fee needs to be recalculated, so it might not actually be, it could be a little bit bigger, it could be a little bit smaller. I did one because I'm in minerals and waste, so I work across both authority, west and north, on these strategic issues. And when I did a calculation for Northampton, it came out to about £70 per dwelling. So it could be quite de minimis there. Where we are yes, I agree though with biodiversity net gain. If a small developer needs, if he's doing 20 dwellings and he needs to deliver £100,000 worth of net gain, I mean that's significant add-on to the potentially add-on. So I think there are also, and I'll just raise it now, potentially implications for how we calculate quantum for our sites when we do the SHLA. Because a site that might have been in the old days been able to deliver 120 dwellings maybe now delivers fewer or the same but of different types of dwellings. So that's for the policy people to figure out, not me.
Right. Okay. Any other thoughts or comments? Jenny, how are you doing out there? Are you?
Yeah, I'm good. It's absolutely fascinating watching from a distance. There are so many concerns, but it's all, I think, it's been a good report. It's just, it's all up in the air, isn't it? I don't like things being so sort of fluid, I'm afraid, but that's just me. But it's watch and see, I think, at the moment.
I don't think it's
been fascinating listening.
I don't think it is just you, Jenny. It is very fluid, but it's really interesting discussion. Okay, are there, just one or two remarks yet coming. Go on, Steve. Go on. I've been unkind to you, so there you go. You're next.
No, just very quick. I mean, obviously the whole point of the paper is, and as you said at the beginning, is going on to the executive. I think to some extent today, and it's been a really good conversation, but it's actually raised more questions than answers.
It has.
And I suppose you were just going into the next steps, Chair, but I can't see how we, at the moment, linking with policy and going to the executive, how that links in with the local plan, because the conversation we've just been having this is, in my view, fundamentally to local plan and the housing delivery. And as we're right in the middle of starting that process, I mean, is this going back into the local development framework as an update, or how's this going to, I suppose, process person, how this is going to fit in with where we're trying to go with the local plan?
I agree with you. This is an interesting point at which we are. I think this conversation will very much shape how we work the next steps. I think there's clearly, there isn't anything yet to take to the executive. What is it, except maybe the actual legalistics at point C, B and C, conceivably. But the actual policy hasn't yet been worked out, has it? Don't know if anybody wants to come in, Simon.
Okay, I mean, I understand the concerns over viability in BNG and the additional contributions that are being made there. I think, though, within this report, it's more about habitat banks, and my thinking on it is about what tools you have in your tool bag. So with that, it's about, do we go forward and continue to explore habitat banks, our role within those, and whether our involvement through Section 106 is the right way to go. And we run that alongside everything else we're doing in terms of seeking to ensure that we're meeting our needs, our housing needs, our employment needs, the growth that's proposed. I would think our conclusions are likely to be yes on the basis that if we're not taking a proactive role in leading on that, we'll find ourselves being reactive or being done to. So I'm thinking that we'll continue along those veins. I picked up on some other points in there around enforcement side of things, and I could be mean to enforcement officers, but they may not necessarily have the same awareness or knowledge as ecologists. So we need to ensure that there's skills that are integrated across, so that they might be able to support through enforcement, but they're looking for the specialism to be in there to help with that. And then the other one is around identifying sites, and it sort of, I think, rolls into the local nature recovery strategy element of things, because I quite expect that is an essential document not only for the local plan but also for the environmental elements, and it may well not only pull out where potential sites are, whether they be called for sites or not, but exactly what they are and what the most important elements are to contribute, coming back to this red kite issue. So I mean, I think I've taken away a lot. I think we're on the right track, but we've still got some way to go. And right at the start, when we flagged around the commercial side of things, and we talked about the legal side of things, it still comes back to us doing some more work there before then rolling out a further report that goes to executive to consider it again.
Anne?
I agree with what Simon says. We cannot look the other way. It is compulsory, it's mandatory, so we cannot just hold our nose and say, well, it's not for us, we don't want to be in that game. We need to be. So I agree. We need to press on with it, and it's good that you've made a start on it. So I agree.
I agree with you, Anne. I mean, the law's the law. It's there. We have to manage it as best we can, and obviously habitat banking is a thing. It's something that we have to engage with. So we probably need to move forward on it. Having said that, we've had a really interesting discussion. We've clearly got a number of quite cogent issues that have been raised during today's discussion that cover the whole of the biodiversity net gain business theme, whether or not with habitat banks. And certainly thank you very much, Heather, because you've given us a lot of insight into where we are and been quite frank about where we aren't. And, we need to continue to work on that. And of course, it does inform a lot of what we're doing with the local plan, which with this extra 18 months will soon disappear. Come on, Simon. Steve?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say, finally, from my point of view anyway, it's been very interesting, and I just want to say I'm 100% behind, I think I've said earlier, this, in relation to habitat banks and and doing this. It's not the but, it's the how. That's my biggest concern in relation to all the wider conversation. I thank Simon for in relation to the process and where we're going with the local plan. It's just more food for thought how we deliver. But it's the how. And it looks to me like it's going to be very difficult, especially with smaller sites. But I'm fully supportive of biodiversity and the gain and habitat management. It's just, we're one council, one area. It's just how we, as I said earlier, it's just how we do
balance it. Yeah. No, and you're right. And I don't think there's anybody in the room who isn't supportive of biodiversity net gain as a principle. You know, we want our area, all 350 square miles of it, to be better when we leave than when we arrived. And that's a very good principle to observe. But as you say, it's for how, and it's also the balancing of that and all the other pressures that growth inevitably provides. Okay, are there any? Yes, Mark, sorry.
I only wanted just to confirm, and I think we've already got it, Steve hit it and said it, that there's so much come out of this today, presumably this is going to come back to us with final recommendations eventually to go to the executive. Or are we proposing this goes to the executive as it is?
I think we're proposing it goes to the executive as it is, but it won't be the same paper. It will have taken into consideration the conversation that we've had today. So it will be the recommendations, which are reasonably specific, are, as you see it, at 1.6. Oh, sorry, wrong. Yeah, 1.6. But the covering paper will take account of the debate that we've had this morning, because we do need to move. We do need to have the engagement with habitat banks and such structure as it is that is recommended to have that discussion. Steve?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for adding that, because I misunderstood it, because I thought it was just going through to note at this point in time and going back here again. Because I have concerns with those recommendations, because it's all about the legal agreement. It's not actually about delivering biodiversity net gain. And obviously some of the issues I've raised this morning, there's no one legal here, we haven't had a legal answer to the questions asked. So I can't see how, nothing wrong with respect, Chair, to your role and the delegation with Simon and yourself, but the questions I asked this morning haven't been asked in relation to the legal positioning, unless you can cover those at the exec, because this is all about the legal stuff rather than actually delivering biodiversity net gain.
I mean, the recommendation does say that members' comments help shape a way forward for the executive to consider with the potential that A, B, C, D and E. It isn't a formal recommendation to executive at this point. So as I said, it will take account of the discussion that we've had, and you're quite right. It must also take account of the unanswered questions which Heather and Simon articulated when they were introducing the report, that there are still unanswered questions from legal who haven't given us a totally clear way forward. So yes.
So not from an ego point of view, Chair, but not just the questions raised at the beginning. I think the fundamentability of the liability, if one of those land bank providers goes bust, is not to my own questions, but from my point of view, that's a fundamental legal question, because that's a real massive risk.
Yeah, it is, and I heard the word bond quietly mentioned, but I'm not sure quite to what extent that is a thing at this point. But no, I mean, indeed. And all the other questions we've, the fact that these are 30-year agreements, these are not short-term. Have we got the pricing right? Have we taken into account all the known unknowns, as Heather referred to? Is this financially viable as well as legally viable? So yeah, there are still a lot of unanswered questions. Yeah, Jenny, yes, please.
No, thank you, Chair. So just to add, really, also in favour of this, but I would have thought, and I think I agree with Steve and Mark, I would have thought, could we not have changes to this paper come back to us before it goes to exec. I think it's just not quite ready to go to exec yet. Sorry, that's just my opinion. I'm hoping that's what Steve was alluding to.
Right. Just one. Thank you, Jenny. We'll just allow officers to have a quiet cogitate on that.
Just to add, Chair, I think it's probably important for us to try and get as much right at the beginning as we can before we crack on. But just a thought.
As I say, I don't think the paper was literally going to exec as written. But hang on, Simon, did you want to speak? Or do you want to mutter in mine?
No, yeah, I won't mutter in your ear, Chair.
You're welcome, always.
So I think, and interrupt me if I'm not right on this, I think what we're keen to do is seek to make some progress on the habitat banks side of things. I think the keenness in part is to do so because we know that there's elections running next year, and we're likely to need to go to executive and to full council, so that there's a squeeze goes on there. That doesn't mean to say that we can't come back in the future with BNG and the practicalities of how we go about ensuring that we're optimising where we need to optimise and we're not restricting on or putting pressures on our continued land supply and granting of permissions. We can perhaps deal with that as a separate element if we're able to make some continued progress with the habitat banks exercise.
Yeah, I mean, I would say to that, what do we need to get through executive or full council before the pre-election period or oblique May in relation to this paper? Because there may well be stuff we need to get done. Steve? No, we'll just wait, just give it a minute. Well, it's always good. You wait, so you look so slightly pained when you're waiting. Right, Stone.
So my understanding is it's linked into or is around the governance of the process, as opposed to the covenant.
The covenant's not a recommendation, is it?
No. So it's providing that alternative. Is it the tools available to us? It's enabling the tools available to us to go about securing a process that enables habitat banks to come forward within our area on the sooner side rather than further down the track.
On Section 106 agreements, as
Yes.
per 6.1, and are we not waiting for legal to confirm some of the context behind that?
Yes, Chair. There are still questions that
Right.
the legal team is going to be one of the key teams that we go to resolve that we're legally setting ourselves up correctly to enable this to happen. So we're testing it properly.
Okay. So it can't really go to executive until we've had a response back from the legal side.
No.
Right.
No.
Have we got an ETA for that?
We've identified December. I think I've put it on the forward plan, in fact, for December. There's quite an in-depth discussion that's gone on today, so there's a longer list for us on issues to resolve. So I suppose in the first instance it's how quickly we can get to legal to start resolving those, but it might mean that it pushes it out to January rather than December as a result.
Yeah. I mean, if you're pushing it out to legal and they have yet to consider all the options on it, you're going to be pushing your luck to get that into December's executive, because you've got about, what is it? You've got less than 3 weeks, about 3 weeks before you have to put the paper together.
Yeah.
And we're going to some very interesting executive meetings in the next few months for obvious reasons. You know, there's a lot of business that needs to be done. So if it went to January, then we could have another sight of this paper prior to it going to executive in January, could we not? And I don't know when our next meeting for EAP is. It wouldn't, sorry?
It is, so yes, it's every 2 months. I think 11th of January rings, so...
Well, that'll be too late.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that would be too late, because obviously the paper would be produced.
We could, Chair, we could bring that, we could bring something back on a workshop basis rather than it being formal.
I think that might be a good idea.
Formal EAP.
Okay.
On the legal side,
Yeah.
legal have been involved in a period of time. It's just that we haven't necessarily managed to nail down answers to the points we have a particular interest in.
I mean, I am conscious of the fact that we do need to come to make a decision to actually enter into whatever agreements we need with third-party landowners. Yeah. So we can't really not do that. You know, it has to go through as quickly as is reasonably possible. But I know that there is, you know, a bit of a concern on the lack of legal context. All right. Are we happy? No, we're not. Steve, you're shaking your head.
Well, the pain looks only because in case I forget what I was actually going to ask. So
well, we're doing
the
our
only
best
reason, that's the only reason you get that. No, I think it's back to, I mean, as we, you know, said many times here, you know, we're an advisory panel, not a committee. If it was a committee, I certainly wouldn't be supporting the recommendations, but we're here to help you. And I said no disrespect to your role or Simon's role in taking something to the executive. I think I'll come back to what I said earlier, though. This all seems about the legal agreement, and we're legally agreeing something when we haven't really got the policy in place. So, to be honest, I do agree with Councillor Bernard Deering. I know we've got pre-election period. I know we've got the election coming up. And I know it's all about timing. But there's got to be much more than the legal agreement to get this policy right. And at the moment, with all the questions today, and there's lots of questions about habitat banking, can we do it, the covenants, the legal questions. There's so much still there that I just don't think... As I said, in normal circumstances, the fashion committee, I wouldn't be able to support this.
Well, don't forget.
It's not ready.
Don't forget that we are already in a legal context in the fact that it's all part of the law of the land. So we don't have you know, quite a lot of the choices we have been made for us by the Town and Country Planning Act. So developing our own policy on this is important, but we do have to react to what legislation already requires us to do. Mike?
When it's been agreed, coming back as a workshop or an update later is, you know, it's after the horse was bolted. Sorry, Simon. You know, it's already done. You know, and passing comments later when it's been agreed isn't really, you know, from my point of view, helpful going forward. So again, I agree with you, Chair, that it's legally there already. If it's just legals going to the executive, fine. But as I repeat, I just don't, in relation to delivering the next local plan and biodiversity next gain, I don't think this is quite there in relation to all this 2-hour debate. And sorry about Andrew's paper so far. You know, it's a 2-hour debate, which is probably one of the longest ones we've ever had on an item. I think it just shows, I'm not speaking for everybody else, but we're not quite there.
Okay. Mark?
If I might, Chair, and again, it's no disrespect on you, I just wonder if there is a way around this, because I understand with everything coming up with the timings and that. Is there a way within these recommendations to add another recommendation that there will be more information or more recommendation to come? This is part A, if you like. There's going to be a part B coming which will involve a lot of things that we have said today, where obviously it's more work involved, but it would, I don't know how everyone feels, but I'm just kind of thinking, I'm not comfortable just saying, yeah, go ahead with this either, but I do think that if timing's the issue, could we go ahead with this, but have an additional F in there that says, you know, this is only part of it, there's another recommendation or more further recommendations to come. Otherwise, as Steve has said, it's a fait accompli, we've done it. Anything after that isn't, you know, we're not going to get anywhere with it.
I mean, I would just have a difficulty with that because the recommendations B and C particularly are suggesting that the Executive Director of Place and Economy, in consultation with myself, enter into legal agreements. So you can't really enter into a legal agreement if there's a caveat that it's conditioned to, you know, something else is coming down the track. I would have thought just legally that would be a bit dangerous. But I do completely get that we need to have developed as advanced a policy as we can to cover that. Jenny, I see your hands up.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. I hate to say this, Steve, but I totally agree with you. I feel a little uncomfortable that I think we need to get this bit right before you can plod on, you know, sort of power forward. I think we're just not there. I think after 2 hours, there's so much that we still need to have answers to. So I feel uncomfortable with this going as it is, I'm afraid.
Okay. No, thank you, Jenny. And don't be afraid. This is what we're here for. Okay, I wonder if Simon or Heather or Andrew would like to comment on any of this. Go on. Who's going to take the poison chalice?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, thank you, because we needed information, we needed feedback, and so this has been a good forum for it. Yeah, I've got lots of notes, that's all I was going to say.
And also, I think it's important to understand that BNG, the Environment Act, is a huge, huge thing, and habitat banks is a very, very small part of the BNG. And we've been talking in its widest sense about BNG today. The report was really to focus our minds and to put in place the governance for entering into habitat banks rather than the wider how we're going to be dealing with BNG for the local plan. And we have these habitat banks that are phoning us on a regular occurrence and saying, where are you with the legal agreement? Because they want that template, they want that legal agreement and the council to enter in with them so they can start selling their units. I think that was the purpose of the report today, which is why, from a governance point of view, we needed to keep progressing it through to executive to make sure that we have the right part in our constitution to say that we are, as an authority, able to enter into those agreements. And what we've set out in a report is a process and the due diligence of how we would get to that. And yes, the debate today has been really useful for putting further information into that report and exploring bits wider. But I think also there's a workshop where we can talk about BNG and the local nature recovery strategy and how that relates to the local plan and any land allocations, etc., at a future date. So I just wanted to make that point, that my understanding of this report was about that small element. But thank you for the discussions.
Okay. Steve?
Thank you, Chair. And as I just mentioned, the nature recovery strategy, she's already given up to going into a workshop at a later date, so we're obviously not going to cover as much as she wants to this morning.
You never know.
I fully understand the further explanations of everything, but I think you said it yourself. Once you've gone down that line on that legal agreement, that's done. I think, as I said, when the carts, but you know, so horses bolted. So I know Councillor Bones said as well. So, but again, we're here to help you. So I don't know what your view is, Chair, because we can have a legal update sent out to us before it goes to the exec with all the questions asked today, and I don't know if members are supportive of that, because in my view, we don't necessarily need to debate it again. I think, well, from my point of view, we've just got answers needed on the questions. Some of those are legal answers in relation to your good self signing that legal agreement that the council's bound into. So I can appreciate we can have further debates about, nature recovery and the biodiversity net gain and the whole wider legislation. But this particular, as we said right at the beginning, 106 is a poor anyway. Yeah. What we don't want is another poor legal agreement. You know, just because we're timed through the elections or under pressure to get things done, it's got to be right. And so we've got legal questions that haven't been answered yet. So whether that could, maybe as a supporter, we can actually have an update paper before the next executive by you good selves, whether that's whether that's doable for everybody and that would be content with that, I don't know.
Well, I'm sympathetic to Andrew's point that the habitat banking industry is sort of pestering us to come to decisions. I don't, in principle, have a problem with working with habitat banks for biodiversity net gain, but I don't think this paper's ready. I don't think that we should be agreeing to enter into legal agreements until we have had our own internal legal advice to set out the legal pitfalls that may or may not be encountered. I would prefer that we get that legal advice, that we discuss it in this EAP as an extraordinary meeting or as a workshop before we then readdress the recommendations. And then I think I would be happy with the recommendations, but I would just feel a bit better reassured if we completed our legal analysis. That's where I come from. Jenny, I see your hands up.
No, thank you, Chair. I wholeheartedly agree and support your comments just now. I think any legal advice and answers, rushed ones are not good ones. And I sympathise with our legal team. I sympathise with all the officers. Yeah. But a rushed decision very rarely ends up being a good one. And I totally support your last comments, Chair.
No, thank you, Jenny. That's very helpful. Okay, any other thoughts? Right, well, we've done that one to death, haven't we? 2 hours on the nail. Okay, right, so at the moment then, we're going to defer this paper, or we're going to defer the recommendations of this paper. We're going to get legal advice on the recommendations and on the specific matter of habitat banking and our relationship with habitat banks and the 106 scenario, and then we'll discuss it in this committee in an informal meeting, and then we will no doubt come to some recommendations which can go forward to, very likely, I would suggest, the January executive. So there might be a fairly short notice meeting of this panel be called. So that, I think, concludes this paper. Thank you very much, all of you, for a really interesting and thought-provoking discussion. And I hope that was, that has materially moved the agenda forward in this context on the wider context of the local plan and, biodiversity, local nature recovery and all of that. So thank you. Okay, we do have a presentation. Now, you could make a suggestion, Andrew?
That I am also doing a members' workshop on Thursday evening.
So you are.
Likely to be exactly the same presentation.
If a proposal came forward, perhaps to combine the two, it might be interesting. I don't know if anybody wishes to.
The invite was sent out, I think, by
That's
Emma
Thursday night, isn't it?
On Thursday, 5:30. I'll be running through the local nature recovery strategy, exactly the same presentation that I was going to give today, so we could look at moving it.
All right.
So I guess I do propose that, and I'm tempted to watch that seminar at 5:30.
Right. Well, thank you, Anne. Okay, well, we'll very, very quickly then, we'll defer that to Thursday. Executive Forward Plan, you've all seen it. There's a number of interesting things going on Thursday, which everyone is very welcome to come to. The most notable being the Planning Advisory Service peer review update. As you know, Planning Advisory Service did a full-on review back in September 2022. They had a number of recommendations. They came back for an update visit, which they always do, and it's quite encouraging. Obviously there's still a lot of work to do. A lot of it's focused on development management. Planning policy was particularly praised, but there's no room for complacency in any area, and we need to carry on onwards and upwards. You know, they were particularly nice about planning policy and all sorts of stuff that we're doing. But yeah, that's looking reasonably encouraging. But like I say, we still have difficulties in that area. December, as you can see, these meetings get longer and longer. So there's what you see there. There'll be an update on the Travellers' temporary stopping site, which should always cause some excitement. And a number of us went to Walsall and Dudley last week, and that was a very, very interesting visit. And two stopping sites, both completely different. One rather bleak and up in the middle of nowhere, and one actually quite small but very much integrated into its local community. So two very different ways of addressing the same problem. And then obviously January, again, all these meetings are going to be pretty lengthy, but January there's some things like a climate change strategy. So there'll be some stuff to entertain and amuse us all. So any comments on the forward plan? Steve?
Just endorse your comments about planning policy, Chair, in relation to what you said about the past review, in relation to the good comments, is what I meant. Because,
thank you.
You know, we obviously with the loss of the joint planning committee, you know, the staffing number is probably not even a third of what it was. So what we're trying to deliver, especially with new local planning, I think I don't think planning policy was ever the issue, but it's good to see the comments about planning policy.
And it is also good to see, I mean, there are such comments, but there is also a reminder and recommendation to the council that we should not let planning policy slide. We're in quite a good position at the moment. We've got a 7-point-something year housing land supply. We've got a reasonably up-to-date local plan, and we're working on the next one. This is all excellent. This is all very good, but it's easy to let it slide a little bit, and it doesn't grab the headlines like development management does. So it's important that we continue the excellent progress under all of you colleagues who are looking after us. Right, well, in that case, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, all of you. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you for your input and your knowledge, your wisdom as well. And
Thank you, Chair.
And it's 12:05, and I declare the meeting closed. Whew.